After 100 years of making cars, MG Rover has run out of options. Just before 10 last night, the Trade and Industry Secretary said the receivers had been called in. Last night, Rover's parent company was insisting it was still solvent. What is clear is that the Chinese have pulled out of a partnership that had been Rover's only hope. The government's offer of a bridging loan had become irrelevant. There was now nothing more it could do.
We have done everything possible. The Prime Minister, the Chancellor, myself. I sent a senior team of officials to Shanghai last week to try and ensure the success of this deal.
Earlier in the day, production had been suspended. Suppliers had begun withholding parts because they weren't being paid. For workers at Longbridge, it was a depressing end to an anxious few months.
I'm just totally devastated, about the same as everybody else. We was hoping something was going to happen, and it hasn't. Like,
there's a massive pension deficit on ours. Who's going to take that one?
6,000 MG Rover workers now face redundancy and uncertainty about their pension fund, which is deeply in the red. Another 15,000 people who work for suppliers in the West Midlands will also be affected. It was a messy end for what was once Europe's biggest car manufacturer. For so long a vital part of the economy, the government is acutely aware of the impact it could have on a number of marginal West Midlands constituencies. Rebecca Pike, BBC News.
Well, basically, if this speculation is stood up today, then that means that basically this is the end. Longbridge was only kept going, the wages were only paid over this last week because of this government loan of £6.5 million this week. If the government is not forthcoming with any more money, then the next thing the administrators have to do is that they have to announce redundancies. There's simply no other choice. So we're waiting, we're expecting this announcement from the government some point today. The administrators have told me that they expect to make some kind of statement today as well. It doesn't look good, to be honest, because this loan from the government, there are questions as to whether they're able to grant it, because it might go against some EU rules about competition and state aid. So awaiting this announcement from the government, but I don't think it looks good at all.
In a business sense, is there any reason to keep paying the Rover workers to stay at home in the chance that somebody might be interested in the plant and take it over?
Well, the last we heard is that the administrators have yet to contact Shanghai Automotive to talk about the possibility of a deal. And here we are on Friday. This has been going on since the beginning of the week. They've been trying to jack up a deal with Shanghai Automotive, and they haven't made contact with them yet. That's the latest we understand. It doesn't look hopeful that they're going to actually get this deal. So if there is no deal, then if you're being totally ruthless from a business point of view, there is no reason to keep paying the wages of the workers, because the next step is that the company has to be broken up and sold off. And that's what the administrators may well have to do if the money isn't forthcoming. But at the same time, Rover does have a responsibility and a commitment to its 6,100 workers. For many people who work there, this has come out of the blue, and they're left with no job security, possibly no jobs, the threat of not being paid after Monday, the threat of not getting any pension as well, and very little redundancy money as well. So the company does have a commitment and a responsibility to its workers, and the government may have thought, well, that's perhaps why the wages need to be paid this week, but it cannot indefinitely keep propping up Rover in order for some kind of deal to be made if that deal is simply not going to be forthcoming.
If this deal is off, and many thought it was never on, didn't they? I mean, even the T&G have said it was a 1 in a million chance. What has the government said about alternative plans? What have they made any commitments regarding enhanced redundancy terms and so on?
Nothing at the moment, absolutely nothing at the moment. I mean, I should put in context that statement that the T&G gave. It was Tony Woodley, the General Secretary, here on Monday in Birmingham at Longbridge, where they had a big meeting of all the 6,000 workers at Rover. There he said that the chances of the China deal happening were 1 to 1. I don't think he was actually calculating the odds. I think he was just saying it was very, very slim. And certainly, you know, that's the case. It was very slim, and it's even slimmer now. I think this has been sort of the last few seconds of the election 11th hour, if you like, and everyone has been waiting to see if something could be pulled out of the bag. But it doesn't look like anything has been pulled out of the bag. But in terms of issuing redundancy notices, that's the next step for the administrators. In terms of coming up with some kind of redundancy package, well, that is yet to be done. I think that may well be the next step as well. That may well be what the administrators are working on. But they wanted this week to try and see if anything could be salvaged, and that was their top priority.
All week, the Longbridge plant has been on life support. Most workers sent home, the production line idle. This morning, the handful of staff left realised the game was up.
We were told at the start of the week that the Shanghai deal was dead and there was a 1,000,000 to 1 chance of it coming back, and that's the way we've been looking at it since then, really.
It looks like dead and buried now.
Dead and buried after 100 years of car-making history at this famous site. An emergency government loan was only enough to pay workers up to the end of this week. Remaining hopes that the Shanghai Automotive Corporation would buy MG Rover evaporated this morning. The company said it wasn't interested. So the administrators, PricewaterhouseCoopers, now running MG Rover, said in a statement, there's no realistic prospect of obtaining sufficient further finance to retain the workforce. Significant redundancies will now be effected.
Hi, love. You expect redundancy notice any moment.
This is the reality of that announcement. Mary Nielsen speaking to her husband, who's worked for the company for 26 years, but not for much longer.
Initially, I am absolutely devastated. I expected or hoped it would go on for a few more weeks. But I guess you've got to be honest, inevitable is going to happen, but it is really shocking.
So what happens next? There could be 5,500 job losses at Longbridge. As many as 15,000 jobs in supplier companies could be at risk. The administrators will try to sell off MG Rover assets.
There's a lot of equipment, some of it not as modern as it might be. Basically, there's not a lot left to sell. Perhaps the MG brand name might have a value.
That's no consolation to workers. Some were back with their families today, trying to come to terms with the loss of jobs, benefits and a likely bare minimum in redundancy pay. Hugh Pym.
Longbridge workers are today facing a new and uncertain future. Despite the announcement of a multi-million-pound aid package, many fear new jobs will be hard to find.
X amount of thousand Rover workers plus other small companies will probably lay off staff, and then we'll compete against school leavers as well, I suppose, when the training, whatever training's finished. So quite a lot of people going for the same job.
Thousands more jobs are at risk at Rover suppliers. They're estimated to be owed £200 million by Rover, but last night some were putting a brave face on their predicament.
Clearly we will need to be looking at new markets and trying to fill the hole that's left by the automotive sector.
We tried to plan for what happens if the MG Rover environment goes really wrong, and on those circumstances we've tried to diversify. We've looked for business elsewhere. We will have an impact on our business, but we're just going to have to get on and fight on and develop business opportunities elsewhere.
The government has announced it's making up to £60 million available to help suppliers over short-term cash flow problems. The money's also intended to help them find new work to replace the business they've lost at Rover. West Midlands business leaders say the Longbridge closure is a setback, but they believe the region can overcome it.
In the main, the 200 that have spoken to us are dependent on MG Rover for 15% of their sales, 20%. Most of them think they can get through it. There are some disaster cases where it's 90%.
Over the next few days, Longbridge workers will be invited to attend workshops for advice on retraining and job hunting. For them, Longbridge is already history.
MG Rover's administrators have revealed that the company is losing £25 million a month.
Yes, workers at Longbridge were sent home on full pay today, but unless there's a rescue package by the end of the week, many could soon be unemployed.
The bleak mood of workers as they left a mass meeting with union leaders reflected the lack of optimism that now surrounds the Rover plant. Most were sent home for the day. Many believed they may be leaving Longbridge for the last time.
don't think we'll be going back, and it'll just be devastating for everybody here.
The last time round we had a bit of fight left in us. We were prepared to go out and have a go to try and save our own jobs, but there's nothing left.
A £6.5 million loan from the government will pay the workers' wages for a week, but the company is in administration and a deal must be done soon to prevent its total collapse.
If we sat here this time next week and we haven't been able to show some good progress and we haven't been able to secure additional funding, then we'd be making the decision that we can't afford to keep the workforce together any longer.
The only prospect of a deal to stop the plant being broken up still centres on China. The massive Shanghai Automotive Corporation is desperate for a brand name and wanted to buy Rover. But the company's dire financial situation may be too perilous for the cautious Chinese to take on. They are saying the deal is highly unlikely to go ahead.
Please don't rush to take a decision, particularly a negative and no decision, because the business logic is there, the reality that the unknown liabilities have disappeared, and therefore it's not beyond the wit of men and women, albeit a continent apart, to salvage something out of this unmitigated disaster.
Losses running at almost £1 million a day have brought Rover to its knees. Very little of the company that was once a car-making giant is still profitable.
It's models like the Rover 75 that have failed to capture the public's imagination. Its image too old-fashioned for today's market. The MG sports car, on the other hand, is a success story. But this may soon be all that's left of Rover.
Rover provokes strong emotions in Birmingham. It's made cars here for over 100 years. The company is not short of supporters, but it needs more than just sentiment to secure its future. Ross Appleyard, Sky News, Birmingham.
Well, all day we've been asking you to have your say on the situation at MG Rover. Should public money be spent on saving the company? Here's how you voted. It's coming up. There it is. No, say 70% of you, quite emphatically. Yes, though, say 30%. Press red and select if you'd like to add your voice to that vote. We'll be running that till midnight.
Now, job centres around Longbridge are opening today to help deal with the thousands of MG Rover workers being made redundant. A special helpline offering advice on retraining has already received more than 3,000 calls. The Sky's David Crabtree joins us now live from the Longbridge plant, and Derek Tedder is outside one of the job centres. David, to you first. Earlier we saw pictures of a demonstration happening at the Longbridge plant. What message do they come with? Well, it was a huge demonstration. Something like 600 cars did the journey from Gayton and Warwickshire all the way here to Longbridge to show their support for the Rover workers. Many of the Rover workers who've been redundant themselves turned up with their families. What they really want is to try to save some of this factory, and what they think perhaps they can do is try to save the MG badge, the MG sports car, and they say they want that to remain British. They're hoping a British company will come and perhaps salvage something here. But they're in the very sad situation at the moment that the vast bulk of the 5,000 or so who are being made redundant straight away haven't even had their letter yet. They're waiting for that. That's probably going to land on their doormat tomorrow morning. So they don't know about 5,000 or so whether they're amongst the 1,000. They'll be kept on maybe for a few weeks to finish off the cars that are currently inside and on the production line. And those 5,000 workers will be very keen to hear what this government inquiry actually turns up. Yes, I think so. They've heard some words from John Towers, not a great deal. He's the man in charge of the Phoenix Consortium, but there are 4 millionaires, we understand, out of the debacle behind me. They're very concerned that on a Sunday, Rover workers are going down to a job centre to try and scramble some kind of job as quickly as possible. And there are 4 men who've made fortunes out of MG Rover behind me. The consortium, the Phoenix Consortium, said it's nothing of the kind. They say that there's been an overreaction. People are jumping to conclusions. They say they, at the very beginning in the year 2000, had the workers at heart, and they really wanted to make a go of this. But there will be an investigation. They'll be very interested to find out what has happened to all the money. Okay, let's join Derek Tedder, who's outside one of the job centres there. And Derek, what's the mood been there like today?
Well, I can tell you, Steve, many people are panicking now. They've had the anger, they've had the sort of disbelief, and now they're in a situation of limbo. They want another job, they don't know how to sort out the benefits, and many of them have actually come here to the Job Centre Plus today, which is only just up the road from the Rover dealership. I can tell you that this is very different to what a lot of the workers may have remembered from the old labour exchange. Many of the workers at Rover have worked there for about 20, 30 years. I remember the dark, gloomy places that used to be the labour exchange, but here it's very different. If I can just show you, it looks more like a building society, to be honest with you. Many people have got access to the computers here. They can actually dial up the jobs. There's something for a computer-aided design technician there, 18 to 24,000. That will be suitable for somebody perhaps from Rover. Let me just show you around and show you what also is on offer here. People can come and sit with a dedicated advisor that they will guide them through what options they've got available to them now. They will talk to them about the benefits that they'll have. One worker said to me, the missus keeps asking me, how much money have I got to spend on food this week? These people hopefully will be able to offer that advice. Also, they can come here for CV preparation, that's quite important, and also interview training. That's another thing that is being asked for. On a practical note, many people here will be able to use the free telephone lines in order to phone up an employer to find out exactly what their chances are. Again, a few people I've spoken to say to me they're worried about using their own phone at the moment. Who's going to pay the phone bill? At least they can come here and actually use the facilities free of charge. They can also use the computer terminals, as I've just said, to find another job. A lot of the workers, of course, are very skilled in a particular area of car manufacturing. They're also worried about how they can retrain. All that information can be given to them here, but until they actually get their redundancy notices tomorrow, that's the key, because they need that in order to claim benefits. What they'll also get tomorrow in the envelope is this pack here. This will tell them exactly where they go from here, because what they're saying to me is that there's this tremendous sense of panic. They don't know what the next step is. They've got all these things to sort out. So as far as they're concerned, if they come here, hopefully they can get the ball rolling. Derek Tedder, for now, thank you.
For the second time in 7 days, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have cancelled their plans and rushed to the Midlands to deal with the Longbridge crisis, not what they'd want in the middle of an election campaign. A short while ago, Mr Blair announced a £150 million package to help workers and the area.
There's no point in me trying to pretend that we can put together some magic deal to get another company to come in and take it over. If we could do it, believe me, we would have done it. We weren't able to do that. What we can do now is do our level best for people for the future and to protect them through a period that's going to be very, very anxious and very, very worrying.
Few in Longbridge are thinking about the election. The three biggest parties have stopped campaigning here. Indeed, the opposition are treating this more like a natural disaster than a political opportunity. But will the collapse of Rover affect the general election result? When seats in the Midlands change hands, governments can fall. Longbridge is in the Birmingham Northfield constituency. It used to be Conservative until 1992, when it narrowly went Labour. Round and about, there are 7 marginal Labour seats. But the Conservatives are playing this very carefully indeed. So was Michael Howard meeting war veterans in Kent. He said he was surprised the government hadn't got involved earlier, but his main concern was for the workers of the plant.
It's a terrible blow to them, to their families, and also to the people who've worked in the dealerships, who work in the suppliers of components. This is going to have, I'm afraid, very deep and far-reaching consequences, and it's a tragic day for thousands of workers and their families.
Charles Kennedy, who's in Cornwall, wants to find out what went wrong.
There will have to be a proper inquiry into the whole background as to how this situation sunk the way in which it did, the government's role, but also, of course, the director's role.
Just after the news broke, Mr Blair was on Radio 2, where he was challenged by a worker at the plant.
We build quality cars in this country at MG Rover, and we're proud to work for MG Rover. Why can we not take it back as being a state-owned company?
I don't think nationalising it is going to be the answer, Phil. And I think it would just be a deception on people to say that if we nationalised the company, we were going to be able to run it ourselves. I'm sorry.
The Socialist Party has called for nationalisation, but no mainstream party thinks the plant should be rescued using taxpayers' money. So any criticism of Mr Blair is likely to be muted. However much money the government gives, the effects will ripple out from Longbridge throughout the region, indeed throughout the country. Think of all the suppliers and Rover dealers like this one. And whilst it's not an unbreakable political rule, it tends to be when the economy takes a knock, so does the government. Mark Mardell, BBC News, Central London.
I think it's particularly devastating since 5 years ago when we rescued this company from BMW's liquidation process. Most people gave us 14 months. The employees, the management here, they've worked so hard. And to get to the point where 5 years later, not 14 months later, 5 years later, we stop at the final hurdle. That's devastating.
Now, they're walking away with virtually nothing. You're obviously walking away with a fortune. What would you say about that?
Well, what we're trying to do is to place a fortune into the benefit of all of the employees and their families and dependents. We've launched today the Employee Trust, which Carl Chin and Nigel Petrie and the Bishop of Birmingham have agreed to be trustees for. That's got gross assets in excess of £50 million. There are clearly creditors to pay, but very few. There are also perhaps people from MG Rover Group's creditors who will try to attack those assets. But I'm very confident that we'll actually have millions of pounds available for those employees to help them through that difficult period.
There's going to be a lot of anger towards yourself and other members of the so-called Phoenix Four. What would you say about that?
We don't see the anger here. We see the anger in the press. We see exciting and quite amazing stories in the press about so-called millions of pounds. What we see here is a realisation on the part of the employees that we have put our personal assets at risk in managing this business through 5 years. We have put a lot of hard work into that process. And yes, we've received rewards for that, but we don't see that anger reflected in Longbridge.
Do you feel guilty in any way, the way things have been handled?
I feel devastated about the fact that we have been stopped at this final hurdle. I don't feel guilty about the process that we've been through. Wind the clock 5 years back and I'd have done the same.
So really you wouldn't have done anything differently if you were back in 2000?
Absolutely not.
There's a lot of criticism that you really haven't been around in the last few weeks while things have been effectively hotting up. What would you say to that?
Well, that criticism again seems to come from people who don't really know what the facts are. I think if you talk to the guys here to understand how many hours a day when we've been here we've been working, and then of course there was the trip to Shanghai as well, where it was we gained the ability to have about 2 hours sleep each night and then get on with the process.
Crisis management is the last thing a government wants during an election campaign. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown were forced to rush to Birmingham yesterday to deal with the threat to thousands of jobs in the Midlands. Election campaigning has been suspended locally, but today the Prime Minister was stressing that his government's support for the Rover buyout 5 years ago had helped to cushion the blow this week.
When I was talking to the various stakeholders on the task force yesterday, that they were saying how actually the 5 years has in fact given us the opportunity to diversify a lot of the supply, and so the effect on suppliers has not been nearly as serious as otherwise it would be.
But the closure of this automotive icon is hard for many to take, and the Prime Minister was asked how he would help those losing their jobs.
By retraining them, by making sure that we give them each a special giving them each a special advisor, and also we're going to open up a new industrial park on the site of Longbridge, and we're going to put money into extra apprenticeships as well in the area. So there's a lot that we're going to do. Okay.
Rover is an election issue, but not the main one, it seems. Cleaner hospitals was Michael Howard's rallying cry in Folkestone today. But the Conservatives do want an inquiry into why Rover collapsed.
The government did get involved. Gordon Brown went to China, but they got involved just in the last few weeks. They must have known that there was a deal in the offing, that there were ways in which they could help that deal, presumably. Otherwise, Mr. Brand wouldn't have gone to China and talked about it. And it seems surprising to me that they didn't intervene to do whatever they could have done at a much earlier stage.
Well, if the students voted for us, then we will win. Yes.
The Liberal Democrats wanted to focus on education, but they too believe an inquiry may now be the best way to learn about what went wrong at Rover.
There is a wider issue going beyond the narrow DTR inquiry into how this whole problem arose, and indeed what happened with the government's proposal to raise £100 million to save the company at the last minute, that apparently was completely contrary to the advice of officials who said this was not a proper use of public money, and we certainly do need to investigate what happened.
Economic stability is the central pillar of Labour's campaign, and the conventional political wisdom is that governments are punished when the economy takes a knock. But Rover's demise had been on the cards for some time, and all the parties are still watching to see just what the political fallout will be. Richard Lister, BBC News.